This is Chapter 6, Crossing the Line. Harriet started off again through the woods. All night she walked north, wading in the chopped tank whenever possible. As the sun began to rise, Harriet dug a hole in the underbrush. She climbed in and pulled some grass and weeds over her head. There she rested as best she could through the day. In the evening, Harriet began following the river again. By now, she knew she must be missed. Dr. Thompson would have slave hunters and dogs out looking for her. She quickened her step, alert for any unfamiliar sound in the woods. At times, Harriet's path north led her to the road. Then she would watch and listen for some time. Not until she was sure the coast was clear, she would race across. Finally, the river narrowed, just as the Quaker woman had said it would. At last, it was just a trickle, and beyond it, Harriet saw a dirt road. Taking a last drink from the chop tank and pulling her bandana down to hide her scar, Harriet walked swiftly along the side of the dark road. And then, without warning, a sleeping spell came on. Harriet sank to the ground unconscious. When she woke up, it was still pitch dark, but she heard men's voices and horses snuffling and stomping on the road. She dared not move a muscle. The men were slave hunters. She could hear them talking about a runaway girl. Then one of the men told the others that they should turn back. They would start hunting again early in the morning, and they would bring their dogs with them too. Harriet's heart pounded as she listened to the men ride off. When she was sure that they were far away, she got up and began running toward Camden again. Now she must find the Huns' house before morning. But the sun rose before Harriet reached the white house with green shutters. She saw a woman in the yard feeding chickens. Harriet began to panic. What if this wasn't the right white house? What if the woman wasn't Mrs. Hunn? Fearfully, Harriet approached the house. The woman looked up and saw the tired, dusty runaway walking toward her. Without speaking, Harriet held out the slip of paper to her. The woman read it and then smiled. "Welcome, Harriet," she said. "I am Eliza Hunn. I'm glad to see thee." Harriet knew from the way Eliza Hunn said thee instead of you that she was a Quaker. She led Harriet inside her house and fixed her breakfast. Harriet stayed for 3 days with Eliza Hunn and her husband Ezekiel. She ate her meals with them and they talked. Most of the time, Harriet stayed hidden inside the house, but when she wanted some fresh air, she took a broom and swept the Hunn's yard. No one passing the house would think that a black girl sweeping the yard would be a runaway slave. And for the first time, Harriet slept in a real bed at night. The 4th night, Eliza gave Harriet freshly washed clothes and packed up a parcel of food. Then Ezekiel helped her climb into the back of his wagon. He covered her with a blanket. Ezekiel drove the wagon through the little town of Camden. On the far side, he stopped the wagon beside some woods. Making sure no one was on the road, he told Harriet to climb out. He explained that it wasn't safe for him to drive her any farther. Slave hunters were everywhere in these parts. The best thing for her to do was to walk north through the woods to Wilmington, Delaware. Just before Wilmington, she would see a cemetery. That was where she would wait for the next conductor. Ezekiel told her it would take 2 nights of walking. After thanking Ezekiel, Harriet turned and disappeared into the woods. Once again, she walked all night, following the North Star. She thanked God for bringing her this far. At dawn, Harriet hid in a hollow tree and waited for sundown. After another long night's walk, Harriet reached the graveyard. There she saw a man. He was muttering to himself. Harriet wondered if he was crazy, but as she drew closer, she made out the words he was saying over and over. I have a ticket for the railroad. I have a ticket for the railroad. Joyfully, Harriet walked up to him. The man introduced himself to Harriet as Mr. Trent. He handed her men's work clothes and explained that she was to disguise herself as his workman. Quickly, Harriet put on the clothes, laced up a pair of work boots, and pulled on a man's hat down to hide her scar. With a shovel over her shoulder, Harriet followed Mr. Trent into Wilmington. In the busy city, no one looked twice at a black man with a shovel. Mr. Trent led Harriet to a house next to a small shoe shop and knocked. "I have a shipment for you," Mr. Trent told the man who opened the door. "1 bale of cotton." The man nodded. Thanking Mr. Trent, Harriet slipped inside the house. Harriet stayed in Thomas Garrett's house all day. He was another Quaker, well known for helping slaves. Because he owned a shoe factory, he always supplied runaways with a new pair of much-needed shoes for their journey. The next evening, a Sunday night, Mr. Garrett gave Harriet fancy women's clothes to wear. He gave her gloves and a hat with a thick veil. When she was dressed, Harriet sat up beside Mr. Garrett as he drove his buggy through town. In her elegant clothes, no one would guess that Mr. Garrett's companion was a runaway. Just north of Wilmington, Mr. Garrett stopped the buggy. He gave Harriet a piece of paper with the word Pennsylvania printed on it. He knew that Harriet couldn't read, but he whispered to her that she would come to a signpost farther down the road. He told her to check the sign for the word that was printed on the piece of paper. When she crossed that road, she would be in a free state. Then she should walk the short distance from the sign to the city of Philadelphia. Mr. Garrett told her that this was the most dangerous part of the journey, even though it wasn't far to Pennsylvania. Slave hunters watched the Pennsylvania border like hawks. In the dark, Harriet started up the road. She was close to freedom, but all of a sudden her sixth sense sent her a warning. Harriet dashed into the woods and hid. A few minutes later, she heard horses galloping along the road. She stayed hidden until all was quiet. Then she ran through the woods, not stopping until she came to the road. The sun was just coming up as she held the slip of paper up to the signpost. The words were the same. It was another minute Harriet crossed the magical Mason-Dixon line. Later, Harriet told how it felt. I looked at my hands to see if I was the same person now that I was free. There was such a glory over everything. The sun came like gold through the trees, over the fields, and I felt like I was in heaven. Harriet was no longer a slave. She was free. Yet the wonder faded when Harriet realized just where her long, dangerous journey had brought her. Years afterwards, she said, "I had crossed the line of which I had so long been dreaming. I was free, but there was no one to welcome me to the land of freedom, and I was a stranger in a strange land. And my home, after all, was down in an old cabin quarter, and the old folks and my brothers and my sisters and my friends were there. But I was free, and they should be free also." Harriet made a vow that at that moment, someday, she would return to Maryland. She would gather her family around her, and she would lead them to freedom.